is David Bragg. I am a director with CAMCO Management. I also am a community manager. We also have presenters. It's going to be Stefan Richter. He is an attorney with Clemons and partner with Clemons, Richter, and Reiss. Let me allow him to unmute so he can say hi. There you go.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone.
And we have Cathi Sleight, who's a representative for Vote HOA Now, which is a online voting company that does electronic voting for associations and for condos and homeowner associations. Thank you.
Cathi, you're still on mute.
Okay, got it.
There we
Hi,
go.
everyone. Cathi Sleight here with Vote HOA Now. Looking forward to spending some time with you this evening and sharing everything I know about online voting.
So just so you know, every month, like I said, we put together these trainings on different topics. The next topic is actually going to be March 6th, so mark your calendars, and it's actually on a really good one, which is renewable energy, and we'll be discussing EV chargers and solar panels in community associations. You know, moving through the future, and everybody's going to these electric cars, trying to be, you know, better for the environment, and with the solar power for your homes. So please join us for that training as well. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn you over to Stefan Richter, who's going to go over the legal authorities within the bylaws and also elections and annual meetings.
So good evening again, and thank you for having me. This electronic voting, electronic meeting, electronic notice topic has really come to the forefront since COVID, and it is a discussion that really focuses on what lawyers call procedural law. So you can sometimes be right on the substantive law, but your action can falter on procedure. You can, for example, have a great case, slip and fall case, but if you file it past the statute of limitations, you have slipped up and procedurally slipped up and lost your case. The same is if you don't raise an issue on appeal, you have maybe the greatest argument, but procedurally you may have failed and you don't prevail. This is a little bit similar. You want to have an election properly, but procedurally you need to meet what your bylaws or the declaration or the governing laws say. Now, with being forced into our homes and locked into our homes a couple of years ago, and it has been a couple of years now, we were scrambling to look for means and methods to conduct our business more efficiently, without paper, without being in person, virtually, with email and electronically. And there are a couple of places that we look for authority in order to do that. The first document that you're all aware of is, of course, your bylaws and your declaration. And I have for you here on the slide a typical bylaw provision that you would have for voting purposes. And it says nothing about electronic voting. It says proxies and mail ballots. Votes may be cast in person, by mail ballot, or written proxy. Proxies and mail ballots must be duly executed. Well, what does duly executed mean? Is it a piece of paper? Does it have to be DocuSigned? Can it be DocuSigned? Can you deliver it by email? Can you deliver it by fax? I know that many associations, even prior to COVID, accepted PDF versions of ballots by email, or for those of you that are old enough to remember fax machines, by fax. And, you know, we questioned back then, well, is that really a proper paper ballot? Can you accept the crinkled paper from a fax machine? Is that a electronic delivery? And most of these bylaws, because they were written when the technologies that we have now come to be using every day were not available, do not address these kinds of things. I know that some of your older documents will talk about telegrams and telex machines. And we had to be creative during COVID in order to interpret these documents in a way that allowed us to use these technologies. Apart from what is in your bylaws, many associations are nonprofit corporations. The Pennsylvania Nonprofit Corporation Law has been amended over the years and does include a number of provisions that during COVID and now have allowed us to utilize electronic technologies for voting or taking other actions, including technology use such as the internet. So we used the authority given to us by the Nonprofit Corporation Law for those associations that were incorporated. Now, luckily, most associations that we represent are incorporated nonprofit corporations, and where their bylaws were such that they were ancient or not helpful, we relied on this part of the law in order to implement technologies such as electronic notice, electronic voting, electronic meeting attendance. Now, the Uniform Condominium and the Uniform Plan Community Act were not fast enough to keep up with COVID. But you may have heard of a recent piece of legislation known as House Bill 1795, also known as Act 115 of 2022, which, among other topics, does now allow associations, even those that are not nonprofit corporations, to utilize electronic technologies for providing notice, for meeting attendance, and of course, for what we're talking about here today, for voting. And if you go to the next slide, House Bill 1795 creates a new definition of what's called a vote management system. And a vote management system, according to the Uniform Plan Community Act and the Uniform Condominium Act, is a third-party vendor who operates a digital or subscription service that securely manages the conduct of elections and voting procedures. So what 1795 attempted to do is to implement a election oversight mechanism for large associations for purposes of preventing fraud. What this also did is to allow the use of these technologies. So if you go to the next slide, please. It specifically now authorizes associations to utilize proxy voting, absentee or electronic ballots for our purposes of voting. Now, there is this caveat in 1795, and it says, except to the extent expressly prohibited in an association's declaration or bylaws. Now, we represent a couple hundred associations, and I have not seen a single bylaw provision or a single declaration provision that says you cannot utilize electronic technologies, or you must be present in person and sign in blue ink with a quill. So I don't think that there is any association out there where electronic technologies are now prohibited. So this is part of House Bill 1795 that was adopted in November of 2022 and will be effective in May of 2023. Now, I've given a lot of presentations about this this piece of legislation and how to implement it. I don't want to beat that horse to death. But if you go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about these technologies. Now, the nice thing about 1795 and the way it describes balloting and electronic voting is that it counts toward quorum, not only proxy and paper votes, but also absentee ballots and electronic ballots. And that's important because prior to this, many of your documents only provided for proxies to be counted toward quorum and not absentee ballots. So we no longer have to worry about that or be very creative in the way we draft these ballots, make them proxy ballots or directed proxies. We can now call them absentee ballots and they will count toward quorum. House Bill 1795 also codifies what we've done in the past, which is if you have multiple votes or competing votes or from the same unit owner, votes where the unit owner will change his or her mind, 1795 says we'll take the last one. So the last one submitted counts. You submit an absentee ballot or submit an electronic ballot. If you then come to the meeting at which the vote is actually closed and tallied, the meeting notice or the meeting ballot will count. If you go to the next slide, please. So electronic ballot is defined as any electronic transmission, email, internet, or vote management system. So now it codifies that you can utilize a vote management system, and we have one presented here today. And Cathi will, in a few minutes, talk a little bit more about what does a vote management system look like, and what the vote management system is required to do is must identify the unit owner submitting the ballot and confirm receipt or of electronic submission of the vote, and the ability of a unit owner to cast their vote. Essentially, all of the things that, you know, procedurally require notice to the unit owner, the ability to cast their vote, the vote to be counted, and the vote to be accurate, and for there to be a record of the vote that you can audit thereafter. If you go to the next slide, please. So what I recommend, and I know you want to hear about what does it mean and what does an electronic ballot look like. But what I do suggest is before, if you haven't already done this, and many of my associations already have, we were faster than the legislatures in the Uniform Condominium and Uniform Plan Community Act. We have adopted provisions for electronic meeting notice, for electronic meeting attendance, and for these kind of voting procedures to be utilized. But if you haven't done it, before you go ahead and do that, you want to make sure that you're complying with your procedural hurdles of your bylaws and your declaration, so that procedurally you've met all these requirements, and somebody that doesn't charge or challenge an otherwise valid vote based on the fact that you didn't follow your bylaws or dot your I's or cross your T's. So, of course, you need to review your bylaws and your voting procedures. Now, with regard to House Bill 1795, you can most likely do corrective amendments to your declaration or bylaws to incorporate these procedures. And if you have your bylaws already amended, you want to make sure that you have a resolution in place as to how to implement it and how to cast your votes, how they'll be tallied, and who's in charge of the system. And then you want to announce and let the unit owners know, how are you going to utilize this? What's it going to look like? You know, we talk about electronic voting, but what does it look like? Am I getting an email? Do I have to, you know, blink twice or put my, you know, finger on the space bar to make sure that I put the right check mark in place? So Cathi will talk about that. So I'm going to hand it over to her.
We did have one question in the chat.
Okay.
And this is actually a very good question. Thank you, Aaron, because we do have a lot of people, board members from New Jersey and Delaware that might be in attendance tonight. But is this specific, the bill, is that specific to Pennsylvania only?
Yeah, so House Bill 1795 is a Pennsylvania bill. I have to tell you that my limitations are the Pennsylvania border. I do not know what's going on in New Jersey in terms of electronic voting, or in other states. I can find out, but I'm not prepared to speak on those states here today.
I would recommend you reach out to your manager and ask them to reach out to their attorneys, which will be better to provide you that information on your specific state.
I would venture to say that New Jersey is probably more progressive than Pennsylvania, but I don't know the details.
Thank you, Stefan. We'll bring it over to Cathi, and I know one of my documents, I think, still has the Pony Express as a way of delivering the budget and mail. So go ahead, Cathi. Thank you.
There was one more question in the chat about when House Bill 1795 goes into effect, and it is the first week in May of 2023. Yes.
And I can just touch on New Jersey really quickly, just for you owners who are out there, managers. Every state is different. Every set of state statute is different. New Jersey has some other layers of where you have to comply, other layers. There's an opt-in and opt-out. The votes must be secret. They must be ran by a third-party provider. So make sure that you're talking to your legal representative, that you understand what that process is. And one of my first slides is it just feeds right into this, which is great. All vendors are not the same. And whether you're in New Jersey or Pennsylvania or any state, you would want to make sure that you're meeting all the requirements of the state statutes in your documents. And which is why it's so important that we have attorneys like Stefan who are willing to share with us everything they know about their state. So, and then one other thing that I wanted to touch on is your resolutions. Don't be afraid to look at them again after you're done and make sure that they meet the needs of your association and that you're making changes as you, or anything that you need to update after you've had your first vote. So I always say those are documents that you can look at and they can be better all the time. So all vendors are not the same. And we know that. So there's a couple things that I want to talk about today. Work with an e-voting partner. And, I was a manager before for 15 years. I carried a portfolio of 27 associations. I was out at meetings all the time. I didn't even know what to do when I came home one day and I wasn't a manager anymore and I moved to the vendor side. It was really scary. It took me a while to find myself, but I did. And I love bringing something to everyone, that really actually works, helps you meet quorum, electronic ballots count towards quorum. There's just so many benefits to online voting. But when you're looking at e-voting partners, and I'll go through just a couple of things here, and then I'll get to what everyone wants to see, which is what are your owners going to see when they start voting. Work with one that specializes in the community association industry. You're probably maybe talking to other vendors or other managers, and just make sure that your e-voting partner understands what the statutory requirements are in your state, that their system meets those requirements, that you're not looking at information that you're not allowed to see before the vote is over, that your vendor is following a process that they can stand behind in the court of law. That's what I always tell all my vote managers. We are only doing things that we can stand behind in the court of law because, chances are someday one of our reports is going to get to court. Luckily, we haven't been challenged at all with any of our voting reports. Also, ask them if they have HOA condo management experience or if they work with condominiums or HOAs. That's really important that they understand the process. And one of them is that it may take a board a few months to approve a new process and implement it. We always say based in the United States because we are, and it's nice that that we're here, we're following, we exclusively serve this industry. So it's nice to know that someone is watching, they're watching the state statutes, they're watching the executive orders, they're having meetings like this, they're meeting with attorneys and talking about what the best practices are. We always recommend that you have a third-party separation, but we think it protects the integrity of the vote, removes the managers, the board members, the committee members from being involved in entering paper ballots or counting or looking at the electronic reports early, making changes that may not be authorized. Maybe you have an owner data record or some other things that we need to consider. So those are all good reasons why you should have a full service vendor providing that third party separation. And of course, we always say that, they should be able to provide some kind of education to you. And when you're done, you should have learned something new that you can share with everyone else. Now, I want to talk about service levels really quick. There are just a few out there, and it's nice to understand them and know what you're looking at and be able to talk to your board members about the service level that they might expect. Of course, we talked about the full service provider. They do everything for you. They manage the vote. They provide regular updates. You can look and see where you are with quorum. You'll never know who's winning until the final vote or the final report is produced. So that's the best of the best right there. And sometimes you'd be surprised. It's not that expensive. There are other choices, of course, and you probably have seen them. A self-service portal, which means that you might be setting up your own ballots. You might be loading your owner data. You may not be weighting or combining some of those properties correctly. There could be other issues. You'll want to make sure if you're going to do that, that you are following a process that you can answer to later after that vote is over and there are questions. That's really when it becomes really obvious that you have to have a process that you follow if you're going to use a self-service portal. And same thing with the management company add-ons. They're great systems. They really help the managers. They can work on it, anytime. And we're seeing a lot more of those software add-ons. So make sure that you're asking questions and you understand the process and that they have a process for voting electronically, building those ballots, making sure that they're meeting all the parameters of the state statutes and the documents. Okay, so on to the fun stuff. The owner viewpoint, for us, of course, it's the regular process. You would ask for an estimate, you would gain approval from the board, you would complete an agreement. Typically, most of the agreements out there are, an annual agreement. Some might be, per vote or per survey. So be sure to look at that. But for the most part, you can vote on a phone, a tablet, your computer. There are some other things out there, phone voting, those types of things. Be sure that you ask how they're authenticating the vote and that you understand if the vote were to be challenged or someone were to ask, that you would know where to find that information. So in the background, all the owner data has been loaded, the ballots have been built, everybody has looked at them, they're approved, we're all smiling like a toothpaste commercial. We're going to start our first vote and move forward. We're really excited to bring this option to the community. So the first thing you're going to see is going to be this email invitation to vote. And they're all different. Ours is just a little bit more customized. Every vote that we do is different. Every unique voting site that we build is different, but they all have the same basic information. They need to, the title of the vote, the homeowner that the invitation to vote is going to, and this could be multiple owners too. It might be Mary and Bill O'Connell that are going to receive this invitation. There may be some additional information here. We need their participation and then their voting weight is what we call it. And in most cases, it's one vote per lot. It could be percentage, or in very rare cases, cumulative voting. I think we have less than 5% of our clients are cumulative voting, but it's out there. Ranked voting isn't really here in the United States that much, so we don't see that very often, but we can provide that as well. So if I own multiple properties, this might say 2 or 3 or 4, and each one of those property addresses would be listed here. That would allow me to see at a glance that all of my properties are listed. I'm submitting one ballot, and I'll be done after this. If someone wanted to separate their vote, let's say husband and wife own 2 lots, they want to separate their vote, they would each need their own primary voting email address, and each lot would be assigned a unique registration code.
Cathi, we did have a question brought up that is voting by Zoom a self-service portal? I would think that would...
well, I think that yes, it is a self-service portal because no one's really setting it up. I think that it would depend on, and Stefan is probably better to answer this question about how you keep a legal record, how you can authenticate that that is the voting, the owner placing that vote. So maybe I'll allow him to answer that question.
I have seen in an uncontested election, Zoom being used for voting by acclamation, essentially, once you attain quorum that the election was ratified. I would not recommend it because of what Cathi just said, it doesn't create a record. Even if you had unit owners type into the chat, somebody would have to, I guess, save that chat and create a record for the association. I think Zoom is more for surveys than a unit owner official vote. Like anything else, I think it can be done. I don't necessarily recommend it because not everybody's going to participate via Zoom. You still have to do some type of balloting or allow the unit owners that aren't going to the Zoom meeting to vote. So, with that caveat, I've seen it done in uncontested elections is what I can tell you. Otherwise, I would continue to utilize more traditional methods rather than just Zoom alone.
And Chuck had a question: if one goes electronic, is there still paper voting worked in with it? In other words, is it all or nothing?
So the answer is no. Legally is no, because the electronic voting is an alternative, a permissive alternative. It is not a mandate. So we're not at the place where unit owners are required to vote electronically, although I think the tendency and the swing is toward more electronic voting than paper ballots. But for those who don't give you an email address, and for those who do not wish to vote electronically, you have to be able to provide them with a means and methods for voting. So some type of paper ballot may still be required for those owners.
All right.
Thank you. Okay, so back to the voting. And so what an owner would do, they'd receive this email invitation to vote. They would just simply click here. There is their 10-digit registration code. Those codes are just random codes that are generated that are tied to each lot or unit. Once that code and that primary voting email address are used, they cannot be used again. So very important that we get those lots and units weighted if they own multiple properties, and that we have that primary voting email address. Now over here, we always give them a little calendar, let them know how long they have to vote. We always recommend that you leave your voting open for 2 weeks. It's just like the appropriate amount of time to run an election. And then of course, amendment votes, issues, items, those types of things may go longer. We try and close them in 3 months. So that's our goal, to close your amendments in 3 months. Isn't that amazing? When I was using the fax machine when I was way younger, we were lucky to get an amendment closed in 2 years. It took us so long, and we finally ended up going door to door, and all of the painful things that the new virtual world is changing for all of us. It's so great. So your invitation, it can be signed by the manager, it can be signed by the board of directors. Everything, can be customized to be the message that you want to send to your community. And then every state across the US has the requirement that if the owner does not want to vote electronically or participate, that they have the ability to unsubscribe or opt out. You'll hear it called opt out. So they would just hit this little unsubscribe button, or they could contact their manager and say, I don't want to vote electronically, I'd like to receive a paper ballot. And we would have their email address removed from the invitations to vote. So that's how they get started. It's a little bit of customization here where I have my logo. We would put a photo or a picture or something really fun and an amenity that your owners are proud of. So there really is a lot of customization that goes into it. And then, you get to comparing all the other products, and you'll find, there are differences between all of them. So I've got my invitation to vote. I had my email address at the management office. It was easy for them to send me my email invitation. And before we started, they sent the notice and said, here, we're going to add electronic voting as an option this year. Be sure to update your browser. That is one of the most common things that owners may fail to do, and it could interfere with them submitting their ballot right away. And, to add a certain email address to their safe sender list. They should know where that email is going to come from on or around a certain date, and they could add it to their safe sender list before the vote even starts. So those are just a couple of different things that you can do to help your owners be successful. But I'm telling you that update the browser thing is just, it's really, really common. So that should be one of your little tools, and just communication, getting that information out. Now, one of the things that you're going to put in your notice is, you should receive an email invitation to vote, or here is a link to our community voting site. If you have not given us your email, you can still vote electronically. Go there and ask for your registration code. So on our system, we just have a little contact us button that goes back to the manager. It might say, I need my code to vote. The manager or the single point of contact would confirm they're an owner of record, they're current on their assessments, or any other requirements that they need to meet to vote in that election or in that issue vote. So those are something, and once everything, of course, is okay, they could issue them their registration code, or they would provide the email address so we could add them to the email invitation to vote list. Now, email invitations to vote. So there's two ways. One, they get the email invitation to vote. Two, they go out seeking the information. And surprisingly enough, we get about 10% of your community coming in asking for their code because they do want to vote electronically. They've seen the option in the notice. They want to take advantage of it, but of course they hadn't shared their email address. I can say you'll have more good email addresses after your first electronic vote than you've ever had. So two ways, the invitation to vote. Second, I go and ask for my code to vote. So we'll move on here. This is the next step, and this is kind of like creating an account. Once the owner completes this form, they do get a receipt that they created the account for two reasons. One, if it isn't them, we want them to let us know. And two, for the electronic signature. So creating an account does meet the electronic signature requirement at the federal level. It's the Uniform Transaction Act for an electronic signature. Say that 5 times fast. But the creation of an account and a receipt meets that requirement, and we'll want to know who in the household is submitting the ballot. Maybe the ballot was, there's 3 owners on the lot, so we'll want to know if it's Stefan or David or Cathi who's going to submit the ballot. We ask them to set a password, and then they move forward to the next step. So typically, all of the information that was on their invitation to vote, their name, their account number, their properties or property, their voting weight, everything that was initially on their invitation to vote follows them to their ballot. These are just a large PDF. I call it the voter's pamphlet. No limit to the size on these documents. You can make the most of it. If it's your annual meeting, put your notice in there, put your budget in there, put your 2023 projects, maybe a letter from the president about, how things are going, the State of the Union, anything, projects, designs, everything can go in there, and pictures, everything. Can go into the voter's pamphlet. So we ask you to create that so you can make it all your own. And on the ballot, if there is something, the meeting minutes, those types of things, we'll point them back to the correct pages to read that information in the pamphlet before they make their selections on the ballot. Now, this is the director's election, and the normal information would go right here, just like you would on your paper ballot. We've got 3 positions open. These are the terms. This is our quorum requirement. We're having, we have several options to join the meeting. We're having it virtually, or maybe you can go to, Clubhouse, or maybe the management office, or wherever you're providing, if you are providing an in-person location. And maybe you just have a computer set up there where they can go and watch the meeting electronically while it's going on. So those are most of the things that we see. Now, electronic ballots are way more than we've ever had with paper ballots. If you're doing an amendment vote, it's really nice to record something virtually. The board talking about all the steps they went through to bring the amendment to the community, maybe the bids they looked at, and why they think it's a good decision for owners to vote, on this amendment vote or an item vote. Record the video, and we can place a link right here on the ballot. So when they come to the ballot, they can click right on that link. They can listen to the board talk, meet the candidates night. Maybe each candidate gets 2 or 3 minutes to talk. That that link can go right here on this ballot. So much fun, so many more things we can bring to them virtually and make it enjoyable. And everything doesn't have to be there on the first vote. These can be things that you add on over time. And I think we're going to find that we're probably going to add quite a few things to electronic ballots. We're going to come up with new fun ideas all the time to make it fun for owners to vote. Now down here, this is just a standard election ballot. We can vote on our candidates or we can vote to make quorum only. So those are the two choices that we would have. I'm going to vote on the candidate. If I selected quorum only, my vote would be complete. I would submit my ballot and I would receive my receipt of exactly how I voted. But I want to see who the candidates are. So these are the candidates, and you can select up to 3. This is the great part about electronic ballots. We will not let them make 4 selections. So every ballot is valid, has the appropriate amount of selections on it. They can't make too many. They can make fewer. They can select 1 or 2 or all 3. If you are allowing write-in spaces, then there would be 3 write-in spaces there to add those candidates. And typically, only less than 10% of the time do we actually get a candidate. It's usually, Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck or, Donald Trump or the dog or something funny, at the moment, of course. So less than 10% of the time do we really get a real nomination. So I think that's really interesting. So this is the best of the best photo, 1 to 5 minute video. All of these things can be added to the ballot and make that experience for the owner, a lot better. This is just embedded text. If you're asking them to write 200 words about, why they would be a good representative for the community, that can be embedded right here on the ballot. Or if they're just write-in or they're just candidates with no photos, we'll tell them, to read about Barry Best, go to pages 4 and 5 of the attached voters pamphlet. Or if the meeting minutes were on here, or your IRS ruling 7604, all of those things that you vote on at your annual meeting. So I am going to, as you can see, I selected Amy Always, and yes, that is a picture of me years ago when I used to flip my bangs over. I've been on the ballot forever. We still got our voters pamphlet over here and a little selection. I've selected 1 candidate, but I still have 2 choices left. So we'll remind them that they do have, 3 choices altogether, but they don't have to select all of them. So I've selected Amy Always because she's great. She's always at the meeting and I like her picture. The next screen, this is a funny screen. This is the confirmation screen. You have the chance to change your mind here. You can go back, you can change your selections, you can add other candidates. But this is a funny screen. It's kind of like when you have that item in your cart that you just really don't need to buy that day and you just get out, you just X out, you're gone. If an owner does that and they've registered, they went through the ballot, but they did not submit their ballot, there's another kind of email that we send, and it's called the reminder email. So there's the invitation to vote and there's the reminder email, and it will say, hey, Mary O'Connell, you registered, but you did not complete and submit your ballot. Here is a link right back to your ballot. So first, they don't have to remember their password, because I know hairs stand up on the back of my neck when someone asks me what my password is. And I'm sure that all of you feel the same way about that. So we will send them a link right back to their ballot, so they can go in and finish. And then, of course, once they are happy with all their selections, they would just submit their ballot and go to the success screen. So I'm going to stop here and see if there's any questions.
We did have a question in the chat, which I want to bring up. Stefan did answer it in the chat. Can a board conduct email votes outside of meetings? Do results need to be still ratified at the board meeting? And what if the results are not unanimous? Stefan did reply with, most bylaws require board decisions to be made during a meeting or by unanimous written consent. The law is not clear whether email consent constitutes written consent, assuming that it does. If the email vote is unanimous, minimally you must ratify the decision during the next next meeting of the board. So, and I'm going to go ahead and allow people to unmute themselves. So if you want to ask questions, please be respectful of all the other people on here that want to ask questions as well. So we'll try to keep it one at a time and so forth. We did have one, if you want to address it, is please address the requirements of HB 1795 as to who can count the votes and the qualifications of this individual corporation.
Okay. So House Bill 1795 segregates existing communities and the voting oversight for new communities that are master associations 500 units or larger in size, or condominium associations that are larger than 500 units in size. If you are one of these newer communities, and you can't be because it's not May of 2023 and you're all here, then the votes can only be submitted to a vote management system. And I had put the definition of that in one of the first or second slides, and we don't really know how the legislature or the law or the judges are going to interpret who the third-party vendor is. But absent a vote management system, if you are a new community, 500 or larger, then you can submit your ballots to a CPA or an attorney or somebody who is independent. So no unit owner, no sister or brother of a unit owner, no immediate family member, nobody who has a financial interest in the association or a financial interest in the management company or the declarant. So cheapest way is probably a vote management system, or you have your attorney or your CPA collect and count ballots. But if you are not a larger new community of 500 or more, then there is again no limitation or definition of what that vote management system is or who administers it. And there's also no prohibition that you utilize your old ways of picking two people from the audience to help you count ballots. I did put the link to House Bill 1795 in the chat for anybody who wants to see how legislation is made and what it looks like.
Mario, you have a question? Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask away.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to thank all the presenters. This information's all been very helpful, and the need to get bylaws updated to allow for voting management system is important. I wanted to circle back, Stefan, regarding the email voting for boards, and appreciate your response. My concern too is if it's not unanimous, if what happens then? Does the majority prevail? Can a board make a decision itself how they want to navigate that, or any thoughts on that?
It depends on the decision, I think. If the decision really cannot wait until the next board meeting, then you make your decision and take the risk that somebody will challenge it. But you go to the next meeting and you ratify any decision that you made by email. I think you should do that anyway. Just as a matter of record keeping, you need to have minutes of meetings and minutes of your decision making. And once you ratify it at the next meeting, you arguably cure any kind of procedural defect in the voting or unanimous consent or otherwise. You may, if you can't reach somebody, that's one thing. If you have a lot of discourse and it's a 3-2 vote, I'd probably want to wait to the meeting if you can. If you're deciding on whether to settle litigation, you have to proceed and do what's necessary to act in the best interest of the association and take the risk that somebody will challenge you. But it's very important to make sure that whatever you decide, you put into the minutes of the meeting, you ratify it, and you kind of cure these potentially minor defects in order to make them less significant. Sunshine cures most ails, not all of them.
Perfect. Anybody else have any questions for our presenters?
I have a couple more slides, so maybe I'll just run through those quickly while everybody's thinking of their next question. Just to go over some of the administration, a single point of contact is going to be the most important person during the vote. That person must have the ability to answer the questions about the vote and ballot and provide that owner data information. I always say it's okay to ask the company or the person how they're handling your owner data, if they're going to sell it or share it. Our policy is that it's the property of the association and is used only for the purpose of voting, and ask them what their delete and archive process is as well. Because, we delete and archive all the emails off of the voting site. So if someone were to go fishing for some information, it would not be there. And we reload new owner data before any vote or survey starts. But during the middle of the vote, you should be able to get the general status of the voting, how many accounts were loaded, how many votes were received, and where you're at with quorum. These are some of the funnest emails that we send, of course, and the funnest ones that you're going to receive when you've met quorum before you get to the meeting. You're only going to have to do it once, no reconvenes or anything like that. It's great to know that you're going into a successful meeting. And then you should receive a final report, something that you can share with your community to be fully transparent. These are some of the examples that we have still telling us where we're at with quorum. And then if this was an election or a candidate vote, the candidates in the order of the most votes received. Also, spreadsheets. These are all of your ballot backups, and you'd be amazed at the information that we have on there. First name, last name, the date, who submitted the ballot, what time, what IP address, that type of information. If there is anything like a section or a sub or a village, be sure to add those columns onto your Excel spreadsheet. So when you get that final report, you can say, oh, I wonder how each individual village did. You could sort by that, so you could see, where maybe you need to get out there and talk to owners more about participating in the vote. So there's lots of fun things you can get out of the spreadsheets. Just make sure that you're adding that information that you want to sort and review once the final report is completed. And then just to end here, some of the benefits, they're so obvious. It's easy for owners. They receive a receipt of exactly how they voted. We've never gotten those with paper ballots ever. So this is a great professional way. If someone were to come to you about their vote, you would ask to see their voting receipt and you could handle it in a professional manner. No miscounted ballots, authenticated results. I won't read all of these, but they truly, truly are benefits of a successful vote, along with no door-to-door knocking or rolling over boards, because you just don't have enough candidates. We really are seeing these communities get engaged and participating in these virtual options. Once e-voting is adopted, you can use it for pretty much any election or any membership vote. And like I said, remember, photos, pictures, colors, everything. We do all kinds of votes, just not elections, and they're really fun. For once, the board and the manager can report that they've saved money. Those funds might be directed to other projects, and you're going to have to get comfortable looking like a superhero. And then I have my last question slide.
I have a question that was sent just to me. What happens if you don't get a quorum or no one runs for office? I think it's a little bit off topic, although a good one. I will tell you that electronic voting has really made getting quorum a whole lot easier. There are a number of provisions both in the nonprofit corporation law and now in House Bill 1795 that address quorum. For elections, it's a little bit easier than it is for meetings for other purposes. But for election meetings, the nonprofit corporation law has an automatic reducing quorum. So even if you have one of these older documents where you have a 50% quorum and it does not reduce, the nonprofit corporation law automatically reduces it to whoever shows up at the second postponed meeting. And the provision in House Bill 1795 walks over that provision into the Uniform Condominium and the Uniform Planned Community Act for election purposes for quorum for reduction. Now, if you don't meet quorum the first time or the second time, you can utilize those procedures. Of course, if nobody runs for office Once you meet quorum, you have a vacancy and you need to start appointing and begging people. Fortunately for me, somebody always steps up. I have not seen a non-board, although I have seen a board run with fewer than all vacant positions.
And we have ran a vote with only write-in spaces. Let's say there are 3 positions, no candidates came forward to submit their forms, and we would run the vote for quorum only and to still consider any candidates that wanted to step forward and nominate themselves for the meeting.
Hey, this is Chuck. I have a question. So, for example, if we have electronic third party handling that for us, maybe you get 400 votes turned in electronically. And then on the other hand, we may have 300 votes turned in paper copy. Okay, so who would wind up melding that together? Paper copies on hand on the site at the clubhouse here, and electronic being held by the third party. I guess we have to count them up and feed them into them, and then they tally it up, and it winds up part of that total, maybe.
Well, Cathi probably has more experience with that, but you are going to get from Cathi a report, a result report that you would attach to or make part of your paper records and add it to those with your paper ballots. And then you'd have to combine the tally.
And, you know,
Make a job for the manager
the best
really
approach. Oh, sorry.
I mean, if you look at it with electronic voting, I mean, that's 400 less votes that the manager has to count out, or the board members or whoever you have as part of your election team that would be counting those. So save you a little bit of time. But you
So
still
Cathi, I have a question.
Well, the other option is that you make paper available upon request. These are just choices that an owner can make during a vote. 1 is to vote electronically, 2 is to come to the meeting, and 3 maybe to call the office and request a paper ballot if that's the choice that they're making. So that would limit the amount of paper ballots that would be out there.
So Cathi, does your system have the capability of weighting the vote by percentage of interest as it is in your declaration, for example, for a condominium?
Yes,
Okay, so it will do the math for you.
it does the math for you, yes.
Okay.
Well, and when we prep to close a vote, we will send you the who has not voted list, and those are the people that you can accept a paper ballot from. So that makes it very easy. And depending on what order they come in, you know, does the electronic ballot win? Does the paper ballot win? Those are probably some things that you should put into your process that everyone understands.
And if you don't get a quorum at one of your first meetings, can you open the vote back up and accept the postponed meeting ballots?
Yes, well, we would never close the vote. If we didn't meet quorum, we would send an invite every single hour, you know, the day of the meeting or the day before. And then if we had to extend it, we would. But, you know, if we have a low participation community, we might put in there, we want to reserve the ability to extend the vote if we don't meet quorum, you know, based on any, you know, historical information that they might have. So we'll just have to make sure that those, if we wanted to use those steps, that they're very clear in the beginning.
Perfect. Anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, can I ask what type of fee is associated with a full service vendor?
Yes, how many homes do you have?
509.
509.
Just over that number. But you're
Yeah,
not
but we-
new.
I bet everyone wants to see the pricing list, don't they? It's only, just give me a minute, I'll pull it up. Even my husband said yes. Okay, we're all in it to win it here. So our pricing, of course, is based on the first vote in a year and how many lots or units you have in your community. You know, all of our clients run 1 vote, and then we do have an additional vote. It is an annual agreement. So let's say, for example, you're doing your first vote a year. It includes your custom voting site, your annual software license, and the full service setup and management of the first vote or survey. So for 500, over 501 units would be $908. And that's what you should budget every year. And then any additional votes during that year, if they were outside of that first vote in a year, would be $335 if we can't add on an additional ballot on an election, or, you know, combine some things together. We'll make sure that we're making the most of all of your association resources.
So what she's saying is if you want to do amendments to your declaration or bylaws during the election vote, you could have that election vote and then also have the amendment vote while you're doing that as well.
Correct, yes. And we would want to have two ballots, one for the election, so we could have a full final report for that, and it will be a separate quorum, then another ballot for the amendment, because we'll want the ability to extend that if we needed to, and also provide a full final report for that vote when it's over.
This is Rocco. I have one question. I'm not sure if you said this earlier, but what is your success rate in terms of the electronic voting versus paper ballot voting?
Well, we're over 90% successful at reaching quorum before your meeting. And that is really only because we're able to send email invitations every other day, asking people to vote, different funny messages. You know, we try and make it fun and entertaining and serious too. So 90% successful at reaching quorum. And then participation, you can expect to at least get 30% of the people that you provide an email address to us to vote electronically.
Thank you.
And that should continue to grow as long as you're continuing to communicate, you know, the benefits, the savings, and, you know, being committed to the transition is, you know, half the battle, really.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? I want to thank everybody for coming today. CAMCO is committed to ensuring that our boards are given proper education and ensuring that you guys have all the information available to you by giving you board roundtables, board updates, and other communications that we send out to, you know, all our clients. We want to make sure that you guys have everything all the education possible to make you a successful community and association. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions, please reach out to us. Our next meeting again is our next board roundtable is March 6th, and that's going to be on EVs and solar panels in community associations. Thank you all for coming and have a great night.
Thank you. Sounds like a motion to adjourn.
I second.
Good night.
Good night.